On the night Carlina White vanished from Harlem Hospital, police officers and federal agents responded with urgency, moving through the corridors where her crib had been found empty and questioning staff, visitors, and witnesses. Alerts were issued to major news outlets, and Carlina's photograph was quickly distributed across the city, appearing on broadcasts, newspapers, and public bulletins as authorities attempted to gather any possible leads. Investigators documented the limited information available, including a vague description of a woman seen near the nursery who was not wearing a visible badge and whose identity could not be confirmed. There were no fingerprints recovered, no surveillance recordings to review, and no clear evidence explaining how the infant had been removed without detection. As the search expanded, the surrounding community reacted with visible frustration and sorrow. Residents gathered outside Harlem Hospital, expressing anger over the apparent security failures and demanding accountability from the institution responsible for protecting vulnerable newborns. Protesters carried signs and called for improved safety measures, questioning how such an incident could occur without immediate explanation. The hospital became a focal point of public criticism, and media coverage echoed concerns about the lack of safeguards and the unanswered questions surrounding the disappearance. For Joy White and Carl Tyson, the investigation unfolded as a painful and exhausting ordeal. Joy spent countless hours visiting shelters, approaching strangers with infants, and scanning public spaces in desperate hope that she might recognize her daughter. She refused to accept silence as an answer and continued searching long after the initial urgency began to fade. Each year, she marked Carlina's birthday by lighting candles and purchasing gifts that were never opened, small rituals that preserved both memory and hope. Carl Tyson endured the strain quietly, supporting the search while carrying his own grief and uncertainty. Despite early efforts and widespread attention, the case gradually lost prominence in the public eye. News coverage dwindled, and investigative resources were eventually reduced as leads failed to materialize. Authorities acknowledged that every available avenue had been pursued without success, leaving the family with no resolution and no definitive explanation. What remained was a persistent sense of absence, a story that once commanded headlines now receding into quiet sorrow. The unresolved investigation left Joy and Carl facing years of unanswered questions, sustained only by determination and the belief that their child might one day be found. The investigation's decline in attention did not lessen the weight of the loss for those closest to the case. Joy's persistence continued in private, far from cameras and headlines, as she held on to every memory and every unanswered question. Carl remained present but withdrawn, coping through routine and quiet endurance. Their lives revolved around an absence that shaped every decision, every conversation, and every passing year, as the search lingered unresolved and the silence surrounding Carlina's disappearance grew heavier with time. Hope endured, though certainty never returned. At Harlem Hospital, following the discovery that Carlina White was missing from her crib, police officers and Federal Bureau of Investigation agents initiated an immediate response and began questioning hospital staff, visitors, and anyone present within the maternity area. Alerts were sent to major news outlets, and Carlina's photograph was disseminated across the city through broadcasts, newspapers, and public bulletins. Reflecting the gravity of the situation and the urgency to locate the missing infant, investigators noted that the evidence available was minimal, relying primarily on vague eyewitness accounts describing a woman seen near the nursery without a visible badge. There were no confirmed fingerprints, no surveillance footage, and no definitive explanation for how the abduction could occur unnoticed within the hospital environment. Outside the building, the surrounding community responded with frustration and sorrow as residents gathered to express anger and demand accountability for the security failures that had allowed the disappearance. Protesters voiced concerns about inadequate safeguards and questioned how an infant could be taken under such circumstances, directing their outrage toward Harlem Hospital and its administrative practices. Media coverage reflected this public pressure, emphasizing the lack of effective security measures and the absence of clear accountability. For Joy White and Carl Tyson, the investigation became an exhausting and emotionally strained ordeal. Joy persisted in her search, visiting shelters, approaching strangers with infants, and scanning public spaces in hope of finding her daughter. She marked each passing year by lighting candles and purchasing birthday gifts, symbolic gestures that preserved memory and sustained a sense of hope despite mounting uncertainty. Carl remained supportive, yet visibly burdened, carrying his grief quietly as the search continued without resolution. Over time, the case gradually lost media prominence as investigative efforts failed to produce viable leads. News coverage diminished, public attention waned, and authorities acknowledged that all known avenues had been pursued without success. What once dominated headlines receded into quiet sorrow, leaving the family confronting unanswered questions and ongoing grief. Joy continued her private search away from cameras and public observation, maintaining her rituals and memories as the silence surrounding Carlina's absence deepened each year. Carl coped through routine and restraint, enduring the persistent weight of uncertainty that shaped their daily lives. The investigation remained unresolved, defined by its unanswered questions and the family's enduring hope that the truth might someday emerge, while the broader public slowly moved on from a case that once symbolized collective alarm and communal mourning. Their focus shifted from public appeals to private endurance, reflecting the reality that repetition had replaced urgency and routine had replaced expectation. Yet hope persisted, grounded in memory, devotion, and the refusal to accept complete silence as final certainty. The lack of resolution remained a constant presence, shaping every passing season and reinforcing the emotional distance between public awareness and private suffering. Through this gradual fading of attention, Joy and Carl continued to live. Carlina White grew up under the name Nettie Nance in Bridgeport, Connecticut, raised by Ann Petway, also referenced as Ann Peway, within an unstable and tightly controlled household. The environment was marked by strict rules, frequent tension, and an absence of emotional security that shaped her earliest memories and daily experiences. From an early age, Nettie lacked basic documentation that would normally confirm a child's identity, including a birth certificate or accessible baby photographs to provide visual or official evidence of her origins. Questions about where she was born or how she came into Anne's care were consistently met with anger, silence, or hostile dismissal, reinforcing an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty within the home. Nettie observed that her circumstances differed from those of her peers, who possessed family albums, medical records, and clear accounts of their early lives. Anne's background further complicated the situation, as it included a documented history of false pregnancies and emotional instability that influenced her behavior and interactions within the household. Her actions were often controlling, limiting Nettie's ability to express curiosity or seek clarity regarding her personal history. Over time, the absence of reliable records, consistent explanations, and emotional reassurance contributed to a persistent sense of confusion and internal conflict. Nettie's repeated inquiries about her identity were discouraged, fostering a growing awareness that her life narrative did not align with observable reality or available facts. Everyday experiences reinforced the perception that essential pieces of information were missing, and that the story presented to her lacked credibility or structure. The psychological impact of existing within a constructed identity manifested as unease, doubt, and a gradual erosion of trust in the narrative she had been told since infancy. As the inconsistencies became more apparent, Nettie began to recognize that something fundamental within her personal history was incorrect or deliberately obscured. This realization did not emerge suddenly, but developed slowly through accumulated observations and unaddressed questions that undermined her sense of stability and belonging. The absence of confirmed lineage, accurate background details, and emotional transparency intensified her suspicion that her life story had been artificially constructed rather than naturally formed. Each unanswered inquiry and each withheld explanation contributed to a mounting awareness that her identity was based on fragile foundations and unresolved deception. Through this gradual awakening, the psychological burden of uncertainty became a defining element of her formative years and shaped her perspective on truth, trust, and personal authenticity. The controlled environment created by Anne continued to suppress open dialogue, limiting opportunities for resolution or reassurance, and reinforcing a pattern of silence and emotional distance within the home. Over years, The accumulation of doubt and the lack of verifiable history deepened Nettie's understanding that her experiences were inconsistent with a truthful and stable upbringing. This growing awareness ultimately solidified her belief that her identity narrative was inaccurate, deliberately concealed, and fundamentally disconnected from authentic truth. Confirmed. Nettie's teenage and early adult years marked a period when her doubts intensified and her need for answers became unavoidable in daily life. At school, she repeatedly encountered situations where the absence of proper documentation could not be ignored by administrators or officials seeking confirmation of her identity and background. These challenges continued into medical settings, where requests for identification and official records highlighted the gaps in her personal history. During her teenage pregnancy, the inability to provide valid identification or medical records created further confusion, reinforcing the belief that essential information had been deliberately withheld. Her boyfriend observed the distress these moments caused and encouraged her to investigate further, suggesting that she seek answers independently instead of accepting silence. Acting on this encouragement, Nettie began searching online for information related to missing babies from 1987, focusing on cases that matched the uncertain details of her own past. Her searches eventually led her to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website, where she discovered a page detailing the disappearance of Carlina White. As she reviewed the information, Nettie experienced an immediate emotional reaction, recognizing unsettling similarities between herself and the missing child described in the report. The images and available details intensified her inner conflict, forcing her to confront the possibility that her entire identity was connected to the unresolved case. Fear and uncertainty accompanied this realization as she struggled to balance doubt with the potential implications of pursuing the truth. For several days, she hesitated, processing the emotional weight of the discovery and the consequences it might bring. The conflict between maintaining silence and seeking confirmation intensified as her suspicion grew stronger with each moment of reflection. Eventually, driven by a need for clarity and honesty, Nettie made the decisive choice to contact authorities, expressing her uncertainty yet acknowledging the necessity of action. When she placed the call, her voice conveyed apprehension and resolve, culminating in the statement, "I think I might be Carlina White." The moment was defined by tense stillness as she awaited a response from the representative on the other end of the line. Her decision represented a turning point shaped by prolonged uncertainty and the enduring desire to understand her true origins. Despite lingering fear, she recognized that the possibility of truth outweighed the comfort of continued ignorance. Each breath she took reflected the gravity of her choice, marking the beginning of an irreversible process toward verification and accountability. Her internal struggle remained evident in the pause that followed, as years of unspoken questions seemed to converge into a single moment of potential clarity. The uncertainty surrounding her identity no longer remained a distant concern, but had transformed into a direct confrontation with her past. Through determination and careful consideration, she stepped forward into an unknown future, defined by courage in the pursuit of factual confirmation. Her resolve marked a defining moment forward. Nettie Nance underwent an official confirmation process led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, beginning with detailed interviews and carefully controlled DNA testing procedures designed to establish her true identity with absolute accuracy. The analysis resulted in a 99.9% match, conclusively proving that Nettie Nance was in fact Carlina White, the infant taken years earlier and long believed lost. Upon receiving the confirmed results, Joy White experienced an overwhelming surge of emotion, marked by tears, disbelief, and a profound sense of relief that her daughter had been found alive. Carl Tyson reacted with equal intensity, struggling to process the reality that the child he had mourned for decades was finally returning to their lives. The first reunion between Carlina and her biological parents unfolded with quiet emotion, defined by cautious embraces, silent pauses, and a shared awareness of the years that had separated them. While relief was unmistakable, the moment also carried the weight of absence, uncertainty, and the recognition that time could not simply be restored. Carlina found herself overwhelmed by conflicting emotions as she stood before the family she had never truly known. experiencing joy at their presence while feeling a deep sense of loss for the life that had been taken from her. The connection was not immediate, and the emotional bond developed slowly, shaped by 23 years of separation, misunderstanding, and misinformation that could not be instantly undone. Throughout the reunion, Carlina expressed a complex internal struggle, balancing gratitude for discovering her true identity with the emotional confusion of confronting a life she had never experienced. She recognized the love and sorrow within her biological family, yet also felt displaced, uncertain where her sense of self truly belonged. Joy attempted to bridge the distance with gentle reassurance, while Carl remained supportive, acknowledging that trust and familiarity would require time and patience. Carlina's response reflected this complexity, as moments of closeness alternated with distance and hesitation, illustrating the lasting psychological imprint of her experience. She acknowledged the significance of the revelation, yet openly recognized that the emotional transition could not be rushed or simplified. The reunion became a careful process of understanding, marked by compassion, restraint, and an awareness of unresolved grief. Although the truth brought clarity, it also revealed the depth of disruption caused by years of separation and false identity. Carlina's mixture of joy, sorrow, and uncertainty captured the reality of reclaiming a life that felt both familiar and foreign. As she navigated this fragile transition, she remained aware that healing would require time and deliberate effort. The confirmed restoration of her identity represented both an ending and an uncertain beginning, grounded in verified truth and emotional complexity. Despite the certainty provided by scientific confirmation, Carlina continued to move forward cautiously, acknowledging that reconciliation, understanding, and genuine connection would develop gradually through consistent communication, emotional honesty, and sustained mutual respect. Anne Petway surrendered to authorities after federal investigators linked her to the decades-old abduction, and she was formally charged with kidnapping under federal law. The legal process moved into the courtroom, where proceedings focused on the established facts and the responsibility attached to her actions. During the hearing, Petway addressed the court, acknowledging her role and speaking about her claimed emotional attachment to the child she had taken. Her words attempted to frame her actions through personal sentiment, but they did not diminish the severity of the crime or the lasting damage caused by deception and unlawful removal. The judge responded directly to her statements, emphasizing that any expression of care did not erase the deliberate nature of the abduction. The ruling clearly stated that love under false pretenses did not absolve legal responsibility or justify the years of separation imposed upon the biological family. The court reinforced the principle that emotional claims could not override accountability for criminal conduct or the violation of fundamental rights. Carlina White chose not to attend the trial, maintaining physical and emotional distance from the proceedings that revisited her traumatic history. Instead, she submitted a written statement detailing the emotional harm caused by years of dishonesty and the impact of discovering that her life had been built upon deception. Her words conveyed acknowledgement of the personal loss endured and the lasting influence of those enforced circumstances. The courtroom atmosphere reflected the gravity of the situation as legal representatives and observers balanced procedural formality with the recognition of deep emotional consequences. Each phase of the process underscored the seriousness of long-term abduction cases and the necessity of clear judicial action. The legal outcome highlighted the importance of accountability in cases where time and manipulation had extended the reach of harm. Through this proceeding, the case demonstrated how the justice system addresses crimes that disrupt identity, family bonds, and personal history. The ruling established that responsibility remains unchanged regardless of years past or explanations offered. It reinforced that wrongdoing cannot be reframed as compassion when rooted in unlawful control and deception. This segment of the case clarified that consequences are essential in restoring integrity to events defined by violation and loss. The judge's decision confirmed that emotional narratives cannot obscure the factual reality of criminal behavior. It further illustrated how justice operates when truth finally surfaces after prolonged concealment and manipulation. By holding Anne Petway accountable, the court delivered a message regarding the standards upheld in abduction cases, and the expectation that actions carry lasting repercussions. Carlina's statement stood as a testament to the enduring emotional scars that persist even when legal resolution is achieved. The proceedings illustrated a structured response to wrongdoing and the necessity of protection for victims whose autonomy and identity were taken without consent and sustained through wrongful silence. Accountability remains central, reinforcing lawful boundaries and victim-centered justice principles. Carlina White entered the prison visiting area to face Ann Petway, the woman who had raised her under false identity and taken her from her biological family. The meeting marked their final documented conversation, centered on direct questions and restrained responses. Carlina spoke with clear resolve, asking why she had been taken and why the truth had remained hidden for so many years. Petway responded emotionally, offering explanations shaped by personal feelings rather than complete factual clarity. As the exchange continued, Carlina recognized that full truth and genuine closure would not be provided in that moment. Her questions reflected the depth of her search for understanding, while Petway's replies revealed hesitation and emotional vulnerability. Throughout the conversation, Carlina remained composed, determined to communicate her lived reality. She stated that she had survived, acknowledging the pain of deception and the years lost to falsified identity. In that moment, she chose not to offer forgiveness, expressing that healing could not be forced. Petway listened quietly, showing visible emotion while facing the consequences of her actions. The encounter unfolded as a restrained yet profoundly significant exchange, where history, loss, and responsibility converge within a confined space. Carlina's decision to confront Petway highlighted the complex psychological impact of being raised by a captor who also assumed the role of a parent. Her measured responses revealed emotional strength shaped by years of confusion and withheld truth. The meeting did not provide simple resolution, nor did it eliminate the lasting psychological scars created by deception and enforced silence. Instead, it underscored the complexity of confronting someone responsible for both harm and care. Carlina's choice to withhold forgiveness emphasized her commitment to authenticity and emotional honesty. The visit concluded with unresolved questions and restrained understanding. The exchange reflected the enduring complexity of her experience and the difficulty of reconciling emotional attachment with documented harm. Every moment within the visitation room illustrated the fragile balance between memory and reality that defined her perspective. Carlina acknowledged the mixture of familiarity and distance that characterized their interaction, recognizing the emotional conflict created by years of manipulation and dependency. While Petway attempted to express remorse, Carlina maintained clarity regarding the boundaries she needed to preserve personal stability. This final encounter served as a defined moment in Carlina's ongoing process of understanding and self-recognition. The absence of complete answers reinforced the reality that closure remained limited and conditional. Her decision to voice her truth without concession illustrated resilience formed through prolonged uncertainty. The encounter ultimately demonstrated the psychological weight of revisiting trauma within controlled circumstances. Carlina left with a reaffirmed sense of identity grounded in clarity rather than denial. The experience highlighted the difficulty of reconciling personal history with emotional memory shaped by deception. It represented a solemn recognition of survival and the enduring influence of past disruption. This moment confirmed her refusal to rewrite reality and confront truth with measured resolve. After reclaiming her identity, Carlina White chose a life defined by privacy, stability, and deliberate distance from public attention. She focused on raising her daughter within an environment grounded in honesty, consistency, and open communication, ensuring that her child would never experience the uncertainty that shaped her own early life. Carlina avoided prolonged media exposure and declined opportunities that would have placed her story at the center of public spectacle. Instead, she directed her energy toward meaningful personal growth and community involvement, including volunteering with missing persons groups who support families facing similar uncertainty and loss. Her reflections on truth and healing revealed a perspective shaped by experience rather than performance. She acknowledged that understanding her past did not erase its impact, but allowed her to live beside it with clarity and intention. Identity, once fractured, became something she rebuilt through conscious choice and self-awareness. Beyond her personal journey, the case continued to highlight systemic failures within Harlem Hospital, where inadequate security measures and procedural oversight allowed an infant to be removed without interference. Despite national attention, the institution faced limited accountability, and no comprehensive acknowledgement of responsibility fully addressed the consequences of its negligence. This absence of meaningful corrective accountability underscored broader concerns regarding institutional preparedness and responsibility in protecting vulnerable patients. The failure to prevent the abduction revealed weaknesses that extended beyond a single facility, raising questions about protocols, enforcement, and systemic safeguards. Carlina's story remains a verified example of personal resilience born from prolonged injustice. Her experience illustrates the long-term psychological and emotional consequences of unresolved institutional failure, while also demonstrating the strength required to reclaim identity after years of disconnection. Through her continued advocacy and intentional living, she reflects the reality that healing is an ongoing process shaped by truth, accountability, and self-determination. The broader issue of infant abduction remains a persistent concern, reinforcing the importance of sustained vigilance, thorough policy enforcement, and institutional transparency. Carlina's case continues to serve as a factual reference point within these discussions, reminding communities of the lasting damage caused by preventable failure and the enduring courage required to overcome it. Her life stands as a quiet testament to survival, illustrating that resilience can emerge from prolonged disruption without requiring constant visibility. Through her choices, Carlina affirms that identity reclaimed through truth carries lasting strength and purpose. This closing perspective reinforces the verified legacy of the case as one shaped by institutional failure and individual resilience. Carlina's commitment to privacy reflects her desire to move forward without remaining confined to a narrative defined solely by loss. Her approach to healing prioritizes accountability, understanding, and the careful restoration of trust. Through deliberate choices and sustained self-reflection, she continues to shape a life rooted in stability. The outcome stands as a documented reminder that negligence carries lasting impact, while truth and endurance create pathways toward personal restoration and peace.